Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I really hope that this very busy week is going very well for you all so far. It's wonderful to have you with us this evening as we're going to explore ways to develop and use an inclusive collection of books with children at your school. My name's Elvie and I'm one of the British Library's learning producers, and I'm going to be joined this evening by a range of really fantastic, inspiring speakers who are experts in their fields. I'm really looking forward to getting started and hearing from everyone. I've got a few just practical points before we get started. Our event today is being live captioned, so if you'd prefer to have the captions on, just click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Everyone in the audience tonight is automatically muted and your cameras are off, so nobody else can see you. You don't need to worry about that. If you've got any technical queries, just please put them into the chat that you can see at the bottom. That'll come through to me and my colleagues and we'll do our best to help. But if you have any issues, for example, with your web connection or your own computer, so you can't see or hear clearly, don't worry. We will be sending out a recording of the event in the next few days, so you'll be able to catch up at another time. So over the next hour and a half, we're going to be exploring the importance of reflecting realities in the books that we share with children at primary school, as well as introducing you to a range of free resources that you can access from the British Library that can help you to address that in your classroom, as well as lots of practical ways for you to engage your children with that material. We're going to have a series of short presentations, and at the end I'll be inviting all of our speakers to join me on screen for a question and answer session. So we can take your questions. You can let us know what they are anytime during the event. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A feature. So if you just click on there, type in your question, and then we will get through as many as we can before the event finishes at 5:30. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our first session. I'm really delighted to welcome Farah Sarouk, who is Learning Programme Leader at the Centre for Literacy in Primary Education and the author of their Reflecting Realities research reports. And Farah is going to be joined by Karen Sands-O'Connor, who is the British Academy Global Professor for Children's Literature at Newcastle University, where she taught the nation's first postgraduate course on children's literature and Black Britain. So Farah and Karen are going to be exploring the importance of reflecting realities in the books that we share with young readers, sharing their insights into the history of representation in British children's literature, and examining how problematic depictions of Black people in the past continue to affect the way that readers understand their world today. So let me turn myself off and Karen and Farah will join you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Elvie, for that introduction, and thank you for inviting us to speak. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to be with us for this special event. We don't underestimate how challenging it is to find the time at the moment, so we do really appreciate you making the time. And as Elvie said, I'm going to start by providing some context for our CRP Reflecting Realities research, and Karen will go on to provide some provocations to help us consider the value and necessity of Black British children's literature. So to warm us up, we're going to have a quick pop quiz. I want you to take a moment to think of 5 picture book titles that meet the criteria on the screen. Okay, so just take a moment and add to the chat 5 picture book titles that you believe meet the criteria on the screen, and that is picture books that are aimed to 3 to 11 readership, that were published before 2015 in the UK, and that featured a Black main character. I'm just going to call up that chat box so that I can see what people are saying. Oh, for some reason it's not coming up. 1 sec.
Farah, I can see a number of the responses, and Amazing Grace is coming up quite a bit.
Great, thank you. For some reason I can't access the dialog box. It's gone, yeah. It's hidden. So tell me some of the stuff that's coming through, Karen.
Hand of Surprise, so much. Any book by Verna Wilkins, Dave and the Tooth Fairy, I saw, Peter's Chair, Growing Good, Snowy Day, Gregory Cool. Those are some of the ones that I've seen. Many of those come up over and over again.
Right.
So.
Right, brilliant. Thank you for that, Karen, and thank you everyone for jotting down in the chat your early thoughts there. And I want you to take a moment to think about how easy or challenging it was to list 5, because as Karen said, there are a number of you were repeating similar titles that kind of have stayed in the psyche or have continued to stay in the system, if you like. But be thinking about how easy or challenging it was to list 5 titles. Were you able to list 5 in total? Did they come to mind immediately, or did you have to rack your brain? Some of you will have gone way back, and others will have drawn on more contemporary titles. And if you took the contemporary track, as I suspect a number of you have, based on the comments there by Karen, you may have referenced Handa, published in '94. Amazing. I don't know, do the 90s qualify as contemporary anymore? I don't know. Amazing Grace, published in '91. So Much in '94. So these are a lot of the ones that were coming through in that chat there. Some of you might have picked up, I'm not sure, on Fario's Beautiful Daughter. That might have been another one that came up for some people. That was a 1987 title, and a couple of you have mentioned Gregory Call, which was published in '94. So interestingly, we did experience a ripple of titles coming through in the late 80s and early 90s, such as those that you can see on the screen, but this rate of production seemed to peter out as the decade rolled on. And given that an average of 10,000 children's books are published each year in the UK, we can appreciate how disproportionate the balance has been in terms of the presence of characters of colour. So why is this relevant to the day-to-day work of ourselves as teachers? As educators, we're always trying to strike that balance between nurturing our pupils' personal growth alongside their academic development. If we've always known in our gut that there is an imbalance of presence in the books that we share with our children, then we need to contemplate the knock-on effect to their sense of self and their world outlook. 2 key anecdotes offered by Verna Wilkins and Darren Chetty, 30 years apart, I think make clear the heart of the issue. Tamarind Books, for many of you will know of Tamarind Books, was founded by Verna Wilkins in 1987 after her 5-year-old son came home from school with a "This Is Me" type booklet in which he'd coloured himself in pink. When she offered him a brown crayon to use instead, he refused, saying that the image drawn of himself had to have pink skin because it was for a book. When she researched the matter further, she arrived at the conclusion that her child and other children from ethnic minority backgrounds were so underrepresented in children's books that she could appreciate why her son would have come to that conclusion. So this inspired her to start publishing ethnically inclusive books, a number of which you referenced in the chat earlier. In his essay for The Good Immigrant, published 30 years later, Darren Chetty reflected on how challenging the children in his multicultural class in East London found it to incorporate protagonists of colour in their stories. When invited to discuss their casting choices, it was evident that the children viewed books to be the exclusive domain of white characters. Both experiences, although 30 years apart, would suggest that erasure in the literature we encounter in our formative years can undermine our sense of self, skew our world outlook, and create problematic misconceptions about who is entitled to occupy that literary space. Now, 5 years ago, the graphic on the screen was circulating across children's literary circles. It's a pictorial distillation of the annual findings of the Cooperative Children's Book Centre at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. As some of you will know, the CCBC have been producing an annual survey that shares insights into the extent of presence of characters of colour in children's books published in the US, as well as noting the ethnic makeup of the creators of these books. And they've been doing this work for over 30 years now. Naturally, these figures and the underlying implications sparked much concern and discussion at the time, and rightly so. I was keen, however, to ensure that this important discourse not be reduced to being a distinctively American problem. All too often in the past, racism has been framed as an issue that is the specialism of our brethren across the pond. And I wanted to challenge that through an exploration of what the publishing landscape in the UK looked like. Because unlike our American counterparts, we didn't have an equivalent study to determine the extent of the issue in the UK. Therefore, 5 years ago, we began seeking funding to be able to conduct the UK's first ever survey of ethnic representation in children's literature. Underrepresentation in this area in the UK is not new, and after decades of advocacy and activism, there was a revived momentum during this period that we felt it was important to channel and contribute to, especially as there still seemed to be a question mark around the extent of the issue in the UK. The survey seeks to provide important data for all stakeholders that aims to inform a more nuanced conversation and help us all ensure that published children's literature meaningfully reflects the realities of its readership. We published the first report in 2017, and subject to funding, will aim to continue publishing an annual survey that reviews industry output year on year. We devised an analysis framework that would enable us to review each title to determine the extent and the quality of this presence. And in each cycle, we invited publishers to submit everything published that year aimed at a 3 to 11 readership that featured any degree of ethnic minority presence. And using that framework, we would analyse the quality of those portrayals. The third report in the series not only reflects on the submissions relating to industry output for 2019, but also reflects on the trends and patterns we've observed over the course of the first 3 years of doing this work. We noted that 7% of children's books published over the last 3 years in the UK have featured minority ethnic characters, with an incremental year-on-year increase as depicted in the graphic on the screen, from 4% in 2017 to 7% in 2018 to 10% in the latest set of submissions. These figures will not necessarily be shocking to colleagues who've spent years having to look beyond UK shores or seek out specialist booksellers and independent publishers to ensure that their bookshelves are representative and inclusive. These figures, however, are very confronting for the publishing industry and has contributed to a wider momentum around calls for better representation in this regard. When working with educators, we're therefore encouraging colleagues to not just think about the volume, but also think about the quality of the portrayals. We believe that literature has an important role to play in centering marginalised perspectives, challenging prejudices, and counteracting toxic narratives. And now I'm going to hand over to Karen, who's going to explore this particular role a little further.
So I have been working in this area for 20 years now, more than 20 years now. And I've often had people, even people at major prestigious British universities say to me, why do we need a separate children's literature about Black British people? Because any good children's book can have a character that readers can identify with. Readers can identify with Peter Rabbit, doesn't matter what color they are. But in fact, there is a need, and that need I have tried to distill down for you because I know you're all teachers and have been working all day, and they asked me to give you a history of Black British children's literature. And I thought the last thing I would want to hear at 4 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon is a history lesson. But what I want to focus on today is how Black British children's literature can produce difference. And they can do it by being a counterintelligence agency. So I'm going to go through these 3 words, counterintelligence agency, and talk about the ways that Black British children can do these different things. So first, counter narratives of racism and the normalization of whiteness. Second, provide readers with intelligence about history.
Karen, you're on mute.
Thank you. My little cursor fell over the mute and turned me off. And third, give characters and readers agency to act in society and as part of the book world. You can, there you go. So I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. And first I'm going to talk about countering. So if you look at children's literature historically, it is always responding to what is going on in society. And countering narratives of racism and oppression was really, really important back in the 1970s, just as it is today. For those of you who may not have been around in 1976 or may not know the Black British history from that time, the 1976 Notting Hill Carnival was one that had a heavy police presence, and it did so because white residents in Notting Hill had complained about the noise and the possible criminality that was connected with Notting Hill. And this is important because noise and criminality were 2 aspects that were often associated with Black British people in Britain at the time, in the papers, in the media. And the 1976 Carnival was incredibly difficult for the Black British community. It was seen as a way to shut the carnival down. And the Black British community reacted in many ways, but one of those was when the author and illustrator Errol Lloyd wrote a book to bring joy back to Carnival, to make sure that children, Black British children particularly, but all children in Britain, could see Carnival as a joyful noise, not a disturbing noise, not a problematic noise, but a joyful noise. And so Nini at Carnival does that, and that's one way that you can counter these narratives of racism and oppression. Another thing that you can counter is the centrality of whiteness. And when I say this, I'm not arguing that, for example, whiteness is something negative, just that when we think, as Farah indicated earlier on, when we think of books, when we think of often British history, what we think of is white people and white actors. And so, for example, if you look at fiction and nonfiction about abolition, historically, those narratives have centered on white heroes, particularly people like Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, Granville Sharp. And this has lasted even through to more recent books like Sarah Courtaulds' Story of Slavery from 2007. But modern or contemporary Black British authors have done work to counter those narratives. For example, Katherine Johnson's Freedom focused on Black British abolitionists and the work that they were doing at the same time as those white abolitionists, working with, in fact, those white abolitionists to end the system of enslavement. And these kinds of narratives are important not just for Black readers, but for white readers as well to hear. All right, Farah, let's go on to adding intelligence. Intelligence about history is something that's very important to me. Black British history is something that has in the past been little known. I just taught my first Black British children's literature course here at Newcastle, and most of the history that I was teaching was new to my students. And I think that is the case for many people, just because it hasn't been something that's been prominent. So you get the histories of Britain, those big colorful histories like this one, which my undergraduate students love because it has lift the flap and they like to play with it. But this history of Britain that you see on the left portrays Britain as an entirely white country, not only in the Tudor period, but straight through to the modern period. If you look at the pictures of World War II, if you look at the pictures of contemporary Britain, they all have exclusively white people. You only see people of color outside of Britain, so in the colonies, etc. Black British authors can add intelligence to this history. They can add to this history by portraying Black characters and Black figures of history, as Patrice Lawrence does in Diver's Daughter, which shows Black tutors. She actually used Miranda Kaufman's book on Black tutors to sort of historicize her own work. So that process is a cyclical process as well. Okay. We can also add intelligence about culture. And this, I think, there are certainly ways that white authors can add intelligence about history. If they do their homework, just like Black authors can, they can do this really well. But I think in this case, adding intelligence about culture is something that Black authors do particularly well, because they have that lived experience that makes it more pertinent to them and to their readers, perhaps. So one of the areas, and this is just one, where culture matters is in issues of hair and body image. Traditionally, Black people in literature have been portrayed in problematic ways, caricatured ways, but also in ways that indicate that their hair, their features are a problem. And so on the left-hand side, you see a picture from a comic called Joe. It was also a cartoon on the BBC. And there's a gollywog figure in that picture, and the little boy is comparing his mother to a gollywog. And it's interesting because Joe actually had a Black British character that was represented very well, and yet still these stereotypes come up that somehow Black hair, Black features are problematic. And so we need illustrators like Dapo Adiola in Lookup from 2019, who can demonstrate just in small ways. This is not even part of the written narrative, it's just part of the illustrative narrative, how much time and care is taken over Black children's hair, that it's not messy, it is not problematic. And the reason that this is important is not just so that Black children can see themselves represented in books, but so that when they are in school, they're not sent home for wearing locks, for example. When they're at work later in their life, they're not asked to keep their hair neat. And these are things that have happened and continue to happen regularly. So we all need this intelligence added to children's books about culture. All right, last letter, A. First, I'm going to talk about depicting characters with agency. If you look historically, British Empire texts tend to portray Black people as passive and in need of white people's help. And that's why you sometimes get that centrality of whiteness that I showed earlier. But recently, especially, we've had a lot of books where characters are given agency. And again, I'm looking at history texts just because that's an area that I'm particularly familiar with. Katherine Johnson's To Liberty depicted here, but also books like Alex Wheatl's Cane Warriors, which is for slightly older readers, give not only a broader view of the experience of Black people during the period, but show Black people taking action for themselves during this period and not allowing the colonial system to push them down or keep them down. They're acting. And that kind of thing is very necessary for all readers to see that history has multiple narratives and people always have acted in their own interest as well as being acted upon. So, and the final slide, we can also give readers agency by handing them Black British children's literature, because we can give them agency to be a part of that reading world, to feel like they belong in the book world, and also that they belong in society. So you have a 1968 text, which interestingly to me is by a woman, suggesting a very male type of person becoming an astronaut. And that's countered in 2019 by Ken Wilson Max's Astro Girl, where Astrid is given the agency to dream to be an astronaut. And that also gives other readers that look at that book, whether they be white readers, Black readers, girl readers, boy readers, the imagination and the opportunity, the dream to become an astronaut or a scientist or whatever. So these are some ways, just a brief set of ways, but some ways that Black British literature can act as a counterintelligence agency. And now I invite all of you to join the CIA. And when people say to you, why do we need Black British children's literature? You have an answer to give them. So thank you to Farah, and thank you to you all for being here today. I really have appreciated the chance to talk.
Thank you so much, Farah and Karen. Would you like to unshare your screen, Farah, when you get a chance? That'd be fantastic. Thank you very, very much. I've seen lots of comments coming up with people recommending books to each other, which is lovely, but also people asking for particular book recommendations. There's going to be stacks more coming throughout the rest of the presentation. Obviously, you can take notes and take photos of your screen, but we'll be sending you some links in a follow-up email just after the event this evening, where you'll be able to find stacks and stacks and stacks of brilliant books for you to use at school. So on that note, our next presentation is going to give you a lot more of that. Thank you very much again, Farah and Karen. And next, I would love to welcome Joanna Brown to join us. Joanna is a teacher and a writer, and brilliantly a long-standing contributor to the learning programme at the British Library. She also previously led the education programme for the Africa Writes Literature Festival, and she's currently studying for a master's degree in creative writing. Very, very busy lady, so thank you so much for giving us your time this evening. So Joanna is going to be sharing how you can make the most of the British Library's Discovering Children's Books website to celebrate ethnic diversity and support your development of a rich, broad and representative reading curriculum. So over to Joanna.
Thank you so much, Elvie. So yes, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. And again, I'd like to say thank you so much for taking the time out to join us in what must be a very hectic and busy week for you all. I'm going to be walking you through some of the material on the Discovering Children's Books website and just sharing some ideas about how to use that site to celebrate ethnic diversity and support your development of a rich, broad and representative reading curriculum. I would also just like to take a moment to say thank you also to Farah and Karen actually for their presentation, which is so inspiring, and I love the idea of being a member of that CIA. As Farah and Karen have really so clearly made the case, to ensure that children can access and enjoy high quality literature that reflects the range of their realities, whatever their ethnic background, we do need careful and considered curation of picture books, stories, novels and poetry in the primary classroom. So what we've done is we've developed a resource. This resource is called All Our Stories. This is a hard copy, but it is available as a free download on the Discovering Children's Books website. And basically this is designed to help you to expand your repertoire of text and activities to inspire excitement, curiosity and joy about reading, writing and illustrating stories and poems. And we're hoping that this will help you to empower children to see themselves as characters in, but also creators of children's books. So in a moment, I'm going to go into the website, but I'll just sort of show you the resource. We've chosen 4 particular themes. So the material on the Discovering Children's Book site is broken up into 17 different themes, but we've focused on 4. So we have home and belonging. So trying to see through my camera backwards there. Journeys. Fairy tales and folk tales. And poetry. Okay, so I'm just going to go in and share my screen. Okay, so this is the homepage of the website, and you'll see that within each theme, I'm just going to go and model this through. So I'll move my Zoom bar. Okay, so we have this wonderful kind of like magic portal basically of all of these different themes to explore in depth, and I really hope that you're able to find some time to have a look around. We're going to go into the theme of home and belonging, just so I can sort of tell you how each theme kind of collects the material. So we have these Go Deeper articles. So these are specially commissioned articles and essays. You can see we've got one here by Farah and Karen about Black presence in children's books. And these really are, I suppose, a great introduction to each theme that can support your planning process and scaffold any staff discussions that you'd like to have about the material. They're also accessible to children, so many of them have been written with a children's audience in mind. So you could read parts of them aloud in class or invite older children or those perhaps seeking more stretch to use them as an independent research resource. You'll see here we've got a themed book list. So all of the themes carry their own book lists, and these draw together the books featured on the website. So the lists can be shared with your school libraries or literacy coordinators, your school librarians or literacy coordinators, or used to enhance the curation of your own libraries and book corners. You could even share them with your parent community, potentially letters, or use them to expand holiday reading lists for children. Your pupils could be invited to write book reviews in response and to add to these lists themselves, or perhaps create themed lists of their own, drawing on their own knowledge of texts. Each of the book lists you'll see contains digitized items, so really beautifully photographed images of the British Library collection items, and we'll look at some of those in more detail. Those are really like the treasures of the British Library, and they're high quality images that make stunning teacher resources, and you can print those off and laminate them for educational purposes. All of the themes also contain these creative activities. So some of them are videos and some of them are activities that you can read through on the website, and they range from composition and story making activities to more craft-based bookmaking activities. Additionally, I'll just scroll up to the top here, we have videos and filmed content. So we have videos and short films with interviews with writers and illustrators, and inviting them to share their creative processes with children and with yourselves. These could inspire author study or independent research, and they're a real kind of insider view into how writers and illustrators work. Do children see themselves reflected in the world of bookmakers? Who are their writing and illustrating role models? So we're going to start by going back to the theme of home and belonging. And I'm going to say that actually it's interesting. I'm so glad that Farah talked about Darren Chetty's essay in The Good Immigrant. You can't say that stories have to be about white people, because actually the thinking that Darren really carefully sets out in that piece of work is very much behind this theme of home and belonging. We're inviting children to celebrate themselves, their own lives and their lived experiences, and engage with ideas of self and community. Here we go. I'll just come out actually of the sharing for a moment. So the title is taken from a quote actually from one of Darren's pupils to another, when Darren had invited the children in his class to draw on their family members for inspiration for characters in their own stories. And one child, a recently arrived Nigerian child, named a main character after his uncle, to which a British-born Congolese child replied, "You can't say that, stories have to be about white people." The essay is a powerful and poignant account of the ways in which children internalise these barriers to their own representation, and explores what we can do as teachers to actively dismantle that process and support children to have the confidence to place themselves at the centre of the stories that they tell and write. So we'll go back into the website. And we'll go into the themed book list now. And our first stop off is none other than the wonderful Look Up. So this new title by Nathan Bryan and Dapo Adiola, which won last year's Waterstones Children's Book Prize. So it's a joyful celebration of aspiration with this wonderful sparky young black girl, Rocket, at its centre, who has a dream of becoming an astronaut and spends her time stargazing. Rocket tells her own story in her own voice. She's curious, she's charismatic, and she drives the story along, persuading her brother and the people around her to stop looking down at their phones and look up to see the magic of the sky and the stars. It's a wonderful story through which to explore our ideas about aspiration, our wishes and desires. What do we want to do when we grow up? What are we passionate about? And I love the way that this image invites us to consider how books can play a role in shaping our dreams and aspirations. The story celebrates the importance of role models, and Rocket herself is such a powerful role model for girls and boys alike. Okay, so our next stop, so you'll see, as you can see with this theme book list, this is where all the texts are listed. So I hope that you will return to it in your own time and have a look through and explore. But we're stopping off here at Planet Omar by Zainab Mian. So this series of stories is lively and full of warmth and compassion and humour. It was originally called The Muslims because the books celebrate Muslim family life through the central character of Omar, the accidental trouble magnet. The stories shine a light on the joys and challenges of Omar's life, everyday school dramas, sibling-related shenanigans, adventures with friends, while also addressing serious issues such as racism and Islamophobia with skill and sensitivity. And I'm just going to come down here. So I can't actually get to the images that I want to. I feel as though my screen is not showing me the options. Okay, here we go. So Zainab Mian actually sketched out her ideas for Omar and his family in her own notebooks. And there's some draft material here that you can explore with your children. And then illustrator Nasaya Mafaridi developed this work further. And within the book, we've got Omar's own drawings of his family members with character notes to bring them to life for us. So the stories feel as though we're reading Omar's own journals, and they bridge that gap really beautifully between reader and creator. If you wanted to explore this book in more depth with an activity, there are a couple of activities on the website that you could look at in particular, and they are the Book of Me and the Step Inside My Story activity, which I'll talk to you about in a bit more detail later on. There's also an interview with Zainab Mian on the website that you could read with your children. She says, "Tell the stories that you have lived. People want to read them. You don't have to write the kinds of stories that are already out there. Be you in your life and in your writing, and that's what people will love." So we're going to go back in, and now I'm going to go back in time to look at a classic text. We'll just go past here, Errol's Garden. So do please return to Errol's Garden, to Julian as a Mermaid, to Zeki Can Swim. We have the journey there, but I'm just going to scroll all the way down. You'll see some familiar titles there. So we were talking about Errol Lloyd. Karen spoke about Nini at Carnival, and we're going to just stop off and have a quick look at Sean's Red Bike. So this is a 1975 collaboration between Guyanese British writer Petronella Breinberg and Jamaican British writer and illustrator Errol Lloyd. Petronella Breinberg's first book for children, The Legends of Suriname, was published by New Beacon Books, London's first African and Caribbean bookshop, which still stands in Finsbury Park, North London, and is offering literary consultancy to schools. The building is also home to the George Padmore Institute, an archive rich with materials that tell stories of Black Britain and its history. And the George Padmore Institute have actually just launched a new website, and Errol Lloyd's illustrations actually are there kind of signalling the different areas of research. So do sort of have a dive in there as well. So Sean's Red Bike tells a story of Sean saving up his pocket money to buy a shiny new red bike. And I think it just really beautifully kind of makes something magical out of the ordinary, out of the everyday, and demonstrates that you don't have to be a magician or a superhero to deserve to be at the center of a story. And in fact, the whole text is reproduced here on the website, so you could explore that story in full with your classes. Now we're going to have a look at another theme, which is journeys. So I'm just going to go back here to the themes. Okay. And I'm going to go into the book list. And again, Karen and Farah talked about the work of Catherine Johnson. So here we have one of her titles, Race to the Frozen North. So that's something I do recommend you have a look at. But we're going to go into having a look at Coming to England by Floella Benjamin. Now, I'm sure you're very aware of this beautiful autobiographical memoir, and may well have already taught it. But I just wanted to show you some of the lovely images and illustrations that we have here, and also look at how you could sort of enrich, I suppose, the teaching of this particular memoir, this really personal Windrush story, by using the Windrush Stories website at the British Library. So we'll just have a look over here. So as you can see, this website it's organised and arranged in a similar way actually to the Discovering Children's Books website. It is an adult-facing website, but we do have, here we go, a pack of creative writing activities that we've developed for primary pupils. And you can see that here we've got archival materials. So Andrea Levy's father, Winston, we have his postcard there of the Windrush. We've got filmed oral histories with members of the Caribbean Social Forum. And And on this page, there are 5 separate activities that you can look at with your children. I mean, each one really could be drawn out over a series of lessons. We've got Poetry for Performance here, John Agard, James Berry, Hannah Lowe. Persuasive Writing. And we've got some material there from the BBC. One of the original Caribbean Carnival souvenir programs from Claudia Jones. And Coming to England. The final activity really kind of invites us to delve into Floella Benjamin's story, but with the support of that archival material behind it. So now I'm going to go back to, here we go, the Discovering Children's Books website, and I'm going to take you into fairy tales and folk tales. So just bear with me here. Okay, so you can see here this Go Deeper article by Jamila Gavin to introduce the theme. And I should say that the British Library has a wealth of fairy tales and folk tales from all over the world in its collection. So if I go again into the book list, I'm just going to scroll through that to just give you a bit of a sense of the breadth of some of the material. We're going to come back to Blackberry Blue in a minute. So we have fairy tales here, obviously from the European tradition. But we also have this beautiful tale, The Phoenix of Persia, which I really do urge you to have a look at in depth, actually, gorgeous illustrations. Gobble You Up, Mami Wata. Okay, so let's go back up to Blackberry Blue. So this is Jamila Gavin's own collection of fairy tales, in which she reworks the stories in the European tradition by Brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen. But her characters come from a broader range of ethnic backgrounds. She subverts the tropes of fairy tales that draw on physical appearance, so that Black and brown children can also see themselves in the fairy tale world. The character Blackberry Blue has skin as black as midnight and tightly curled hair like threads of gold. So, excuse me just scrolling through, I can't actually access the sort of the buttons at the bottom that will take me a bit more quickly. Here we go to the image that I wanted to show you. So the work invites children to explore different ways of describing appearance and ways of talking and writing about a range of skin tones and hair textures with sensitivity and nuance. And I think we can't really underestimate the detrimental effects on children of being consistently confronted with messages that enforce the idea that pale skin or straight golden hair are norms or fixed beauty ideals that they should aspire to. So this language models a kind of an inventiveness, a care and a sensitivity that children can bring to their own work when they're writing stories that include characters of different ethnicities. For example, if your children are illustrating their stories, working with skin tone pencils, for example, I think it's important for them to be given time to really think carefully about the words and phrases that they're going to use to describe skin tones. So I'm going to come out of here and just go back and just show you a couple of activities that you could use. So this lovely activity here at the top, Star in Your Own Fairy Tale, is a collage activity put together by my colleague Mira Chowder that invites children to star in their own fairy tale. And down here we have the Story Collector activity that invites children to draw on their own cultures to create a fairy tale anthology. So the last theme that I'm going to show you here now is poetry. And all I'm really going to do is just give you a sense of the breadth of the material. So we have lots and lots of video material here. Joseph Colo, who has developed some wonderful videos for us here, sharing his creative process, stepping us through how poetry is, I suppose he talks about poetry sort of gathering ideas as we go, something that's always kind of fluid, something that children can be sort of drawing on the world around them at all times and developing their own poetry notebooks. So the techniques that are being showcased here, mind mapping, notebooks, drafting and redrafting, hopefully are habits that can become part of your classroom routines. We have a classroom resource here, Create a Classroom of Poets, which you could come back to and look at in some more depth. We've got activities to help you make your own pop-up poetry notebooks. We've got some poetry prompts, interviews with poets. In the themed book list, again, we've got draft material there from the wonderful John Agard and Grace Nichols. So if you wanted to have a look at some of their notebooks and their own manuscript material, do come back and have a look at that. And I also highly recommend Ruth Awolola's wonderful mind mapping for poetry, in which she kind of models really beautifully how she uses different notebooks to develop her work. So just to finish off then, I'm going to show you where to find all of the different creative activities that we have on the site here. So we'll just go through this wonderful sort of magic door. And this is also where you can find the teaching resource. So this is the free downloadable resource that will step you through what I've just been talking through in much more detail and recommend a whole host of texts for you to explore with your classes. But what I'd like to look at here now is the Step Inside Your Story activity. So we're inviting children all over the UK to take part in a new creative project, the story with themselves at the centre. The Step Inside Your Story activity invites children to make their own concertina books and fill them with stories about themselves, starting with reality, their home lives, their local environment, their families, their communities, and then adding some magic, allowing their imaginations to take flight into the fantastic. So we've used some text to kind of scaffold the story making process. So as you can see there, we've got Planet Omar, Look Up, and Nimesh the Adventurer. And we've also, we've got here showing you how to make your concertina book. We've also got yet more video material where authors and illustrators have made their own concertina books and talked to you about that. So I recommend you come back and have a look at those as well. Some of them are exploring identity, some of them are exploring the role of story. So Sandra Agard, for example, explores her relationship with stories. And what I'd like to do now is just leave you with, if I can just go back into sharing my screen. So I'll come out here. And I'd like to leave you with some of Rocket's words, actually, and some images from Dapo Adiola from this year's World Book Day celebrations. So, from Look Up. Every night before bed, I set up my telescope and look up at the stars. My mum tells me that I never stop looking up and that my head is always floating in the clouds. One day, I'm going to be the greatest astronaut, star catcher, space traveller who has ever lived. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna. That was a really lovely note to end on. And another reminder, so you've seen this several times now, we'll be sending you, it's already in the chat actually, but we'll be sending you an email after the event today, a link to where you can download this on the website. And the version you can download on the website is hyperlinked. So every one of the stories that, that Joanna has mentioned, you can just click on a link inside the version of this on our website. It'll take you straight to those resources. There's a link in there to the Windrush Stories website that Joanna mentioned as well. And if you scroll right down to the bottom of the online version, there are links on the back to web pages from the Centre for Literacy in Primary Education, for example, if you want to follow up anything from our other speakers today. Joanna's closing a little bit there from Look Up was a lovely link actually over to our third presentation, which is from Megan Hopper Layton, who is a Creative Associate at 7 Stories, the National Centre for Children's Books, who we love. They are one of our key partners in the Discovering Children's Books website and the learning programmes that happen around it. And when you visit the site to see some of the items that Joanna mentioned, you will see stacks of really fantastic material from the 7 Stories collection. So Megan is going to be sharing some insights from her own practice at 7 Stories into how to build children's investment in book stories and illustrators in your classroom, and some more really useful stuff that you can get from 7 Stories. So Megan, over to you.
Thank you very much. So, ooh, do I need to pin myself? I can't see myself. Hello, everyone. So yes, my name's Megan. I'm a creative associate at 7 Stories, and for those of you at this National Centre for Children's Books, and for those of you who haven't heard of us, we are a charity that's based up in Newcastle. We started life as an archive collecting everything children's literature related, and then now we've got a visitor centre where we get to show off our lovely archive material and promote children's literature. And we also have a creative learning programme inside the building, but also externally in schools, communities and organisations that just celebrate all things children's literature. So my role at 7 Stories is to create and deliver content for 7 Stories. And what we do and what underpins everything we do is making things fun. That's pretty much what underlines everything that we do. We have an aim to create experiences that are entirely positive and centered around children's books. So we know that if they have interacted with 7 Stories, they are going to have one positive memory around children's books, because so many people think, so many children have negative things because they get, it can be a cause of quite a lot of anxiety in children is books. It can be quite formidable. So we devise things that are just fun and enjoyable and lovely. And so what I'm doing here is, when you're talking about diversity in books, it is so important to make sure that these books have those positive associations. So on the topic of diversity, it's important to do the positive associations because it's great to have the books, all of the amazing things that we've discussed on this webinar so far, all the amazing books. It's amazing to have them in school, but we don't want them to get lost. We want to make sure that these are the books that are loved. They're the books that the children are invested in. They're the ones that they remember, that they engage with, and that they take forward into the rest of their lives. So I'll just bring up my presentation really quick. So what I'm going to bring us through is, I'm going to show you some of the resources that are available on 7 Stories website, just ready to go. Then I'm going to recommend some activities to help the visibility of these new books that you've either found in your libraries or in your collections, or ones that you've now been so inspired that you're going to go out and get. So how to increase their visibility and also their memorability is what I want to call it, so that they're the ones the children love. And also give you some storytelling hints and tips to help with engagement, so that when you've got the books, when you're telling them, they're great and they're very well loved. Whoops, too far. So if you go to the 7 Stories website and go to learning and books and resources, there are 2 main areas of the website that I would recommend. So we have our Black Stories Matters book list, which is wonderful list if you're looking for recommendations for books with diverse stories, and also our diverse voices free resources. So as you can see, we've got a wide number of book recommendations. They're broken down by age group, and we've got so many in fact that they wouldn't fit in one slide, so there's the rest of them, just to give you a starting point, as well as all the ones that you've been introduced to so far. There's a good place to find some more books as well. And also the Diverse Voices free resource packs. We've got 4 research packs. They're just free to download. They focus on 1 book per key stage from EYFS up to key stage 3, and you just download them. And they do quite succinctly what I'm going to talk about in this presentation. Is they give you examples of what you can do before, during, and after a story to make it a very well-loved story. So for example, this is the EYFS one. It just breaks it down and then gives you some recommendations of books that you can do. But I will let you explore that in your own time. So now that you've listened to these presentations, you've heard all the activities, you've heard all of the books, you've either collected all the ones from your library or you've gone out and bought some more. What should you do with them? How can you start and how can you get them introduced into your classrooms? So this is, I like to do imaginary workshops. If I had gone into your school and been handed these fantastic resources, what would I do with them? So first things first, your books arrive, you've got them. Then I would try and build investment in the entire set of books. See how we can make sure that the children want to read the next one as well, so they're invested in all of the books. Then build investment before an individual story, do an interactive story, and then some creative exploration for joy, and then how we can now use this shared knowledge to keep referring back to. So strangely enough, I'm going to start at the end with step 6 of how we can use the shared knowledge once they've read it. So once we've shared the books and they're now the books that the children love, we can now use that shared experience and that shared knowledge to keep referring back to through the rest of that child's experience in school. The wonderful thing about stories is that when you read them together, it's like you've gone somewhere together. It's like you've experienced an event together without ever having to leave the classroom. You now have that shared knowledge that you can keep talking about. So when we're talking about diversity, what you can use within that is that you now have lots of different vocabulary, lots of different people that you can keep involving in your classroom. So for example, if you were in a science class and someone was brilliant, instead of calling them a little Einstein, you could call them a little Rocket from Look Up, or you could call them Ada Twist or Izzy Gizmo or Macy Jemison, to introduce these new prominent names as the ones that they recognize and that they hold dear. And what I would do is, when you've got your books, as you're reading through them, grab a pad of sticky notes, and so you can make yourself a little cheat sheet. What names do you want to keep coming back to help build them into the knowledge of the children? And also you can look at some other things that books can offer and make yourself a cheat sheet for those as well. So is the book you're looking at particularly good for exploring narrative? Because stories show cause and effect. Is it a particularly good book for saying, oh, well, this leads to this, which leads to this? Is it a particularly good book for using the imagination and visualization? If it's a place, could that student then imagine themselves in it? Does it create a wonderful visual? Where's my note? So I stopped stumbling quite so much. And does it help put things into context, so they're not imagining random facts? They can imagine the whole scene in context. Is it a good book for lived experience? Does it create empathy and help them put themselves into the character's shoes? Or does it demonstrate a topic in context so they understand it? Or does it relate to their own lives? Does it help them understand themselves because they can see themselves in their lived experience in that story? Is it just a brilliant book for investment? Is it just the most fun book you've ever seen and will want to keep reading it? Does it make them care about the characters? Does it make them care about the conclusion of the story? And will they want to keep experiencing it for that fun element? Or is it a brilliant book to share? Does it have quotableness? Does it have shared words that you'll be able to keep coming back to? And as we all know, that's how stories started, was just being shared through generations. That's why they're so good, because they're memorable and they're easy to share. And is this a particularly good book to use for sharing? You can put those on post-it notes so that when you come back to the book, you know exactly what kind of shared language you can use from now on. Whoop. So going back to go forwards. So your books arrive, And an activity that I would suggest for building investment in the entire set is a one that I've invented myself, called Face the Author. So much like what Joanna was saying about introducing all of these different authors into the classroom and getting their energy and seeing how their creative processes and all things like that, what we can do with bringing authors into the classroom is possibly create an author's wall, because as we all know, authors are quite like radio presenters, in that unless you take to the internet and try and find out who they are or anything about them, you could read a book and never know who the author is or what they look like. So what I recommend is you print out a picture with the author's name underneath it, print out the titles that are either available in your school or related ones that they can investigate themselves, and then set the children the task of matching the name that's on the picture to the name that is on the book. And then using these pictures and images, you can stick them on the wall and create a display so that they have a new wealth of knowledge of names that they can keep referring back to, rather than the same old names that we all know that we will hear in the classroom more often than not. When you ask, what is your favorite author, you can get the same list. So we want to build the associations with these different authors and illustrators and bring them to the forefront of their mind and get them invested in the books, because they have chosen them, they've helped match them, and they become more invested in it. And this was actually inspired by Holly Sterling, who's down in the corner, because when I started out as a storyteller, she came to the visitors centre and I used to read Hiccups in every one of my story times. It was my favourite book to go to. And when she arrived, I didn't know who she was. She said she was here to meet one of my associates, and I asked her name. And when I realised who she was, we both got very excited because I recognised her and she was just starting out as well. So she was quite happy to be recognised as well. So you could do this with the books that are just going into the general circulation, or you could add to it as you introduce a new book. You can put a new author onto your wall. You could do them all at once. But when you are exploring the book, I highly recommend you research the author at the same time. I've been doing this for all of my stories at the moment, and it's been eye-opening. Rashmi Deshpande, she is an amazing woman. When you research them, you can realise how close to the heart they can become. I love this woman now because I read all about her on her website. She is so inspirational. She's got a really small YouTube channel that has very few views. So that means that if you interact with those videos, you might actually be able to speak to an author, which would be so. As you explore the book, say you were reading Never Show a T-Rex a book, you could say afterwards, oh, shall we look into Rashmi? Shall we see if she's got a YouTube channel or a website? Look at some of her videos and see how you can explore that author. You can also see if there's any events. We've actually got an upcoming event at 7 Stories, which I found out after I made the slideshow. So next week, if you wanted to meet Rashmi in an Authors into School event, head to the 7 Stories website, because I will be attending that event because I really want to meet her now I know a bit more about her. You could also frame yourself. So now that you've been introduced to these authors, you can frame the students as that author once you've done a bit more investigating. So as we've already talked about Joseph Coelho, he has got the biggest presence online I have ever seen of any author or illustrator. He is so invested in creating poets and creating people who are really interested in reading and poetry and writing and all of those things. So as you are reading his books, you could add him to your wall. You could look at his website, look at his YouTube channel. He also has a YouTube channel, or any other resources that he has produced. As you can see, I always have a giggle whenever I see Joseph's face on things, because he is everywhere, and rightly so. He is absolutely inspirational. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. And that's him featured on the British Library's website. I think he's featured on 7 Stories website, and I also think we have an upcoming event with him as well. So definitely a one to look out for and introduce to students as their new favourite author. And then now that is your new favourite author, you can refer back to him. You could read Joseph Coelho for a day, or you could look at some archive material and explore that further as well, so that you can create your own poet's notebook and be Joseph Coelho for the day. So now that they're invested in the text, they've created their own display. I'm going to talk you through some storytelling techniques in particular. So building investment before the story is even started, interactive elements during the story, and creative exploration for joy afterwards. At Seven Stories, we use the same structure pretty much every time. We have a hook so that before that book is even open, they are already invested. The excitement is buzzing and they cannot wait for that book to open. An interactive story with elements you probably already use, but just heightening them and making sure that this is the best book that they've ever read. Book chat afterwards, because there's been tons of research done on reading is brilliant, but it's talking about books afterwards that helps build better readers. If they talk about it, it becomes more enjoyable and builds the world around it. And then some fun follow-on activities. So for a hook, all you want to think about is warm-ups that you could do. So that might be a game or a mime. If it's an adventure book, you might mime packing your adventure backpack and popping it on, or just moving the limbs around to get them warmed up. You could build intrigue by setting up the room in a particular way so the students don't know why it looks like that. So they're asking questions already of, why does my classroom look like a jungle right now? Or just introducing things and the students don't know why, and the book is the answer. You could gain the current understanding of the students, so ask them what they already know. My particular favorite is to play the fool, so that they have to teach you something. It works really well. It makes them very giggly and very excited for the story, because they then become they're the ones teaching you, and they always love that. And investment through involvement. Before the story starts, tell them what's going to happen in the story that they get to join in with. What jobs and responsibilities have they got? Do they need to show you the actions because they'll do it better than you? Or but getting them invested in the story because they know how much fun they're about to have. An interactive story. So as I said, you probably already do quite a lot of these yourself, using voices. I always go high, low, fast and slow as my 4 ones that I always go back to. Doing the actions, finding places for the children to join in on words, asking questions all the way through, doing sound effects. Some ones you might not have thought of are signaling a page turn. So if they are meeting new characters, they might have to say hello every time. If it's a book about a cat, they might have to meow every time. This particularly works well with younger readers, because even if they've got a bit distracted, they all get brought back in to do that repeated action every time a page is turned. You could pause a story and play a game in between. This works particularly well with non-fiction books. So for example, on Dosh or any non-fiction book, you could read a passage, then play a game that's related to that passage, so that everything good that's happening is attributed back to the book. We read this passage, it inspired me to play this game, let's do that, and then go back to the book afterwards. Or introducing props and things that they can play with or you can show off. Book chat afterwards, we all do things like ask opinions. What was good about that? Did you like it? What was your favorite part? But asking more things, so making it personal to them. Would you have done the same thing if you were in their shoes, or has anyone ever experienced this? To get discussion going, you could do a vote so that they've already shown an opinion, so you can ask one side versus the other and discuss it that way. Or collecting, I constantly use, which is where everyone in the room shares one word, and then you can go back to particular people. Oh, you said that, why was that? And build on it that way. But that way everyone has heard their voice, had their voices heard. And reenacting and revisiting. So look, when someone mentions a page in the book, actually going back to that book, that page and looking at it, or acting out an entire page of it as well. And then last one is follow on, fun for fun's sake. So importantly, all the way through, everything good that's happening, you have to attribute it back to the book. So they are going to do some amazingly fun follow-on activities, but it's because of the book that they're doing them. So obviously there's been all of the recommendations made on the British Library's website. They are brilliant follow-on activities. But if you were coming up with them yourself, I find it easier to think of it as of just going through and post-it noting as I read my book, crafts, songs, role plays, equipment and games, and exercises or workshops. But depending on how your brain works, it might be easier to think of the follow-on activity as art, music, play, drama, or lesson, just however your brain finds it easier. But this can be part of your post-it noting. So you've looked through and you've looked at the vocabulary that you can now all share based on these books. And then you can think about what your hook's going to be, what your interactive elements in your story are going to be, what questions you're going to ask, and what activities you're going to follow on with. And then hopefully, now that we've had all of these wonderful books that have been recommended by Karen and Farah and Joanna, and the 7 Stories book list, all the ones that are available, they will hopefully be the ones that are at the core of the students' minds, and they're the ones that they will carry forward and not just let them be forgotten on a shelf, bought in for no reason. Make them the center part of what inspires them and make them their good memories with stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. That was really lovely, full of stacks and stacks of ideas. Somebody's just said, thanks, Megan, you're a tonic. I agree. So we've got a bit of time left now to have some questions for all of our speakers this evening. So if Joanna, Farah and Karen would like to join me back on screen, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. Nearly got everyone, and we've got some questions from our audience, really interesting questions that I would love to ask and get your perspective on. Okay, first of all, so this is an interesting one. Obviously, we've got people in the audience from schools right across the UK in really, really different areas. And Liz has asked, how important do the panel think it is to have ethnically diverse books in schools that have mainly white children? I don't know who to ask that to. Anyone who would like to offer any thoughts?
I mean, I think it's just as important, really, wherever you are. In brief, I would say that.
I do think that in terms of countering stereotypes, in terms of adding information, it's really important for all children to see all people who exist in a country and in the world, as far as that goes, you know. And I think that that's sort of why I framed my presentation as I did, because a lot of times when Farah and I have been doing the Reflecting Realities research, you know, we get a reaction that this is just for Black British children or just for ethnic minority children. But in fact, we all live in this world and we all have experiences that need to be shared and need to be understood. So I think it's important for all readers to read all people. So
lovely, thank you very much. So next we have a question from Zach, which is about book recommendations. We've had stacks of recommendations, obviously, right throughout today, but this is specifically whether you could suggest any titles that are appropriate for 9 to 11-year-olds that have got sufficient depth to study as part of a comprehension syllabus.
I would say, in addition to the titles that have been referenced today, another area you might want to look is the CLP's core books list online. So we have a comprehensive imprint physical library, a reference library of 23,000 titles ranging from early years through to the beginnings of Key Stage 3. For colleagues who can't get to the physical library, we have our Library in the Sky, which is the core books component of our website. If you go into that part of the website, you'll see that for every year group, we have categorized 3 key collections: a literature collection, an information book collection, and a learning to read collection. So if you go to the year group that you're teaching, the literature collection will give you the kinds of books that you're probably thinking of, Zach.
I would also add that Letterbox Library has great collections curated, which is nice. I know that teachers don't have a lot of time. And also, if you're looking for ways to think about them, Darren Chetty, who Farah mentioned in her presentation, and I write a column called Beyond the Secret Garden in the online journal Books for Keeps, which is free to access for everyone. And we do different themes every couple of months. The next one is on British, East Asian, and Southeast Asian books for kids. So.
With the 7 Stories resources, that's broken down into years, so there is one specifically. A personal recommendation, because I'm currently using it in schools at the moment, is Zombierella by Joseph Coelho, which is really fantastic. Obviously, as Joseph is a poet, it uses really poetic language, and just the fact that it's written by Joseph means that there is a lot of content online that you can explore. So you can head to the British Library's website and use all the things and then spend a day as Joseph, but there's a lot to look at that one. That's a personal favourite.
Lovely, thank you. So we've looked at a really kind of diverse range of books throughout the site, but there was a particular question from Kay about whether we had any recommendations. Again, loads of book recommendations wanted, which is wonderful. About the feature characters from India in particular, or from Indigenous characters from Australia, New Zealand and Canada.
Again, I'm just now turning behind me. I wish I have my bookshelf over here as well, so you might see me disappear off screen. I've read this with a school. It's called Sona Sharma, Very Best Big Sister, and it's set in India, in West India, I want to say. And it goes down really, really well with students. It was one of their personal favourites, so I highly recommend that story.
And Megan, do you want to say something about Over the Hills and Far Away?
Oh,
have you got that as well?
Why? Every book we mentioned today, I shall just pull out from behind me. So this is a fantastic book. It was written by one of the founders of 7 Stories. It's a collection of poetry and nursery rhymes from all over the world, and then I don't know if you can search for them by country, but if you're looking for just multicultural in general, this has international poetry and sometimes comparative ones. I kind of really, actually it's on the website, so I shall recommend you look at the British Library's website, have a little look, because one of my favourite ones to share from this is the 4 different versions of Little Miss Muffet. Little Miss Muffet. No, that is right. It's because there's 4 different versions. So I always say the Australian one, which is my personal favourite. So I recommend definitely go and look. And it also shows the creation of lots of the original artwork as well. So you can explore archive material, internationalness. It's a brilliant book, lovely resource online. Whoops.
And going back to the point that Karen made about Letterbox Library, as well as obviously stocking the stock, they do work with schools to help them in curating titles and collections that will best suit the needs of their readership, and will help you and encourage you to rethink broadly about that stock curation, not just in terms of thinking about Indigenous and populations beyond the UK shores, but thinking about the balance of outside UK versus inside UK. So thinking about South Asian representation, for example, within the context of living in the UK and being part of the fabric of UK society, but then also thinking about those traditional tales that sit on in Asia, and thinking about it in those terms. So I would highly recommend talking to Letterbox, but also our resident librarian, who would also be able to kind of point you in the right direction too.
Lovely, thank you. So another question here we've got from Liz. So Liz has been looking at Planet Omar, which has come up a few times this afternoon, and just wondering about some of the depictions of racism in the book, and wondered about whether reading accounts of racism might be upsetting for children, and whether you had any strategies in mind for kind of managing that in the classroom.
I would think that reading accounts of racism should be disturbing for everybody, for all readers. And I don't think that's a reason to put the book away. I think it's how you talk about it. And I would really recommend Darren Shetty's work on this, because he has worked through Philosophy for Children, which is a way of talking to children about issues of philosophical context, but he does it particularly with issues of race. And I think that you could get a lot out of, I have gotten a lot out of reading his work. So.
And you want ideally the classroom to be the safe space because, you know, not talking about it doesn't mean that we're not thinking about it. And there's so much discourse around race identity in mainstream media. You just look at this week in of itself alone has been quite explosive, and I would say that it's exceptional, but it isn't, because if you look at the last 5 years in particular, we've had a very concentrated period during which there's been masses of mainstream discussion around all things race and identity, from Brexit through to the Windrush scandal, through to obviously the royal kind of situation that we have at the moment. All of those things will be filtering down to our children. They will be overhearing snippets. They will be engaging in conversations, you know, be it in the playground, in the bus, at the bus stop, or in their own living rooms, you know. So they're not, you know, not absorbing this, and so the classroom is a safe space to explore this, and a book like Zainab Mian's, thinking specifically in that instance about Islamophobia, gives you the scope to explore that using the book as the core stimulus. So we're not projecting onto the children in the classroom, we're using the book as a vehicle to explore that, so that you can create as much distance personally as you need to make, you know, as an individual who may have been affected by that, because we're looking at it through the eyes of the book. So I think books are really valuable in that respect.
Yeah, like when I mentioned in the presentation about that shared vocabulary, once you've read the book together, that's now part of your shared experience, your shared knowledge, so that if a child experiences that in the classroom, you have that, oh, how did the characters in that deal with it? Or if someone is acting inappropriately, you've now got a face to put to that. The characters in that story got really upset when that happened. Why? Like, and you can use that for empathy. So it can be a really important tool for that shared experience. And just as Farah was saying about putting things into context, instead of hearing those little snippets, it's giving them the whole world that they then get to explore and understand it in more depth than, oh, this is vocabulary that I've heard, I'll use it. It's, oh, this is the effect of that vocabulary.
Just like to second everything that everyone has just said, and just to sort of add to that, that I think one of the things that we've also seen over the last year is the danger of what happens when we don't talk about racism. You know, when that's not discussed, that for me is a far more worrying scenario. And as Farah said, you know, these conversations, children are aware of what's happening around them, and I think as teachers we have a real responsibility to create a space where they can see feelings openly and not feel that they need to kind of leave those at the door, leave those at home when they come into school. I think that's really, really important.
Thank you. So just to switch back to book recommendations again, because we're getting a lot of questions about that. There's a number of, Megan's poised, there's a number of people who have mentioned that they've got a lot of children in their classes who come from Eastern Europe. And wondering if, you know, we've talked about the wider world for the most part so far today, and Britain, but do you have any recommendations of books that have characters or are by authors from Eastern Europe?
I'm going to pause for a second while I desperately search, because I know that there is one recommended on 7 Stories website, so I will let other people talk, but I remember it twigging in my head because I was thinking of diversity, and then an Eastern European book popped up, and it hadn't occurred to me to think that way, but I know that it is featured on 7 Stories website, so I shall be right with you.
The ones that come to mind are all YA for me immediately, not necessarily for a primary facing audience. And I think that is an area that, because when we're doing the analysis of the submissions, I think that is an area where you know you're not seeing as much representation. But yeah, everything I'm thinking of is YA. I can't think off the top of my head a recent in-print title. Yeah, I'll just have to pause while I kind of go through my back catalogue in my head.
Some people in the audience are putting some recommendations in the chat actually that I can see, so do have a little scroll through that. People who had asked that question.
And I'm sure people are already doing this, but sometimes obviously I think we can always ask the children as well if they can recommend books that they might be reading at home that they're not seeing in school perhaps.
Okay, we've got loads and loads of questions here, probably too many for us to answer, so I'm just scrolling to see if I can see which ones that are unique Give me one
And
moment.
I'll just go back. So the one that I was talking about is part of the Diverse Voices Key Stage 3 research pack. So it is one of the older stories. That's what I was thinking. But there is a book list that I hadn't actually discovered yet on Seven Stories website. So that's very bad on me as a representative of my company. If you type in Seven Stories Diverse Voices, it comes up with even more resources than the ones I mentioned before. So you can get directly there. And there is a book list involved in that.
Great. Thank you, Megan. So we've got a few questions on the same sort of theme here that I'm going to try and pull together. So people wondering about your views on using books that feature more diverse characters but are written by authors who don't share those characters' ethnicities or experiences. And someone had said whether that might be disempowering for some children to think of themselves, you know, maybe as characters but not necessarily as authors. Does anybody want to comment on that?
I'd like to have a little bit of a think, but yeah, can I have a think and come back? I like to think a bit for a moment, actually.
I think it fully depends on the book on whether it's a good depiction of diversity in the stories, because there are some absolutely beautiful and wonderful stories that are not written, the author is not reflected in the story. So it would just have to take a conscious effort to have a look at what kind of representation it is. So if you were doing this authors' faces activity and you realize that some of the authors didn't match up, maybe that's a discussion to have in the classroom and think, well, why did someone else have to write it? Why couldn't it be a diverse author that's represented? But
also to ask the question, do they have some experience that they bring to the table that maybe you can't see in the color of their skin? Because it's not just about skin color, it's about being a part of a community, and to write about a group of people that maybe you don't belong to requires you doing your homework in one way or another. Sometimes that homework is lived experience, but sometimes it is actually homework. And that goes for all authors, no matter, you know, what they're writing about, I think so.
I'm thinking of Beverly Naidu, for example.
Yeah.
Who has both the lived experience and has done.
She's really done the work.
Research,
yeah.
Which Seven Stories has in their archives, if you ever want to go see.
I think it's really evident when the work has been put in. But equally, it can be evident when the blind spots kick in, and the blind spots are more likely to kick in when the work hasn't been thoroughly done. But the flip of that is also to think about to what extent does that negate opportunity for authors of colour to be able to step forward and be able to tell those stories. And so it's about striking the balance. And I don't think you can, as I think the group is alluding to, I don't think you can make a blanket statement one way or another. I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I think you have to go book by book and really think about, has this book been well researched? Has it been well considered? And you know, what's gone into shaping this title? And then more widely, if you kind of think about the work of Dr. Melanie Ramshambold and the Book Trust, thinking about the accounts of authors of colour and their experiences within the industry around what some of the obstacles might be for not having the platform to be able to tell your stories. Because you think of something as delicate as the image that Karen shared at the beginning, Dapo Adeola's drawing of the kind of hair moment, the intimate hair moment between mum and daughter there. Now, that may have been included as a detail in that book had Dapo not been Black, but it probably wouldn't have been. That insight, that insight is really quite significant. It's a significant moment, but it's such an understated moment. And it's really apparent when we're reviewing the books for Reflecting Reality. It's really apparent when the insight has been considered, has been thought for, has been researched, or is drawn from personal experience, and very apparent when we're just quickly colouring in a character Black or brown just to meet a quota, or because we want it to be reflective and we think that will be enough. There's a real nuance in terms of the quality that comes through as a result of that consideration. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think there isn't a straightforward response. Ultimately, I think it's about doing the work.
I think, though, to add to that, Farah, you're absolutely right. And in terms of the Reflecting Realities reports, the more recent reports, when you've done that really kind of deep dive work into the different kind of levels of representation, I think that that's work that teachers can really use to sort of help support their own responses to books and their own sort of curation. I think, you know, I'd love to see that work being taken into sort of, you know, CPD sessions in schools. Do you know what I mean? Like sort of classrooms where teachers are actually having the opportunity to take the time and to look at books and kind of really question what's happening there in terms of whether the work's being done or whether, as you say, there are sort of token gestures being made. I think it is really important that we're digging down at that level into the material.
Absolutely. And I think that was always the intention with the research, that we want this to be impactful across stakeholders. I think the first level of this work is about holding the publishing industry to account and having those difficult conversations. But then you want the flip of that to be, we want to disrupt the demand and supply chain here. So if we attend to one component, the next component is to think about, okay, as the demand element of that, as educators, there are 18,000 schools. And that's a lot of consumption there potentially, and if we can become more critically reflective as a collective and more discerning in the choices that we're making, we can ultimately shift this imbalance once and for all.
Teachers will demand books that have
and demand better.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That seems like a lovely note to draw things to a close on. We've slightly run over our time. I apologise. Everyone's tummies will be rumbling and be desperate to get off home and get some dinner. So can I say thank you so much once again to Farah, Joanna, Megan and Karen for all sharing such fascinating insights and your wonderful energy with us this evening, as well as Patricia from Stage Text, who nobody's seen but who has been providing us with captions if you've been using them this evening, and also my colleague Andrea Varney, whose name you've probably seen popping up in the chat, who's been behind the scenes and helping make all this happen and responding to your little questions and problems during the event. We will be sending you an email next week with a recording of the session, links to the resources that our speakers have mentioned, and also a feedback survey that we'd really love you to complete. If there's any thoughts that have come up for you today that might inform the kind of stuff that we offer in the future to support your teaching, please let us know. We'd love to offer you whatever we can. Finally,
thank you for having us.
Thank you, Karen. You're most welcome.
Thank you.
Finally, a reminder about our Step Inside Your Story campaign that Joanna mentioned. We'll send a link to that in the email as well, to all the resources that you can use to take part. And remember, if you can send us photographs of any books that you and your pupils make before the end of March, we'll be including a selection in a virtual library of all of our stories, giving children hopefully a lovely opportunity to see their work celebrated alongside that of children from all over the UK. So that is it. Thank you once again so much for joining us. I do hope you found it useful and enjoyable. Have a restful evening, and I hope the rest of your full week back at school goes really, really well. Thank you.